Welcome back to the show. I'm your host, Phil Risher, and on today's episode, we're going to be discussing legal protection strategies for growing home service businesses with Mitch Beinhaker. Thanks so much for joining us today, Mitch.
Thanks, Phil. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So Mitch is the owner of Beinhaker Law, a seasoned attorney with over 32 years of experience specializing in business law, real estate transactions, risk analysis, and estate planning for entrepreneurs and small businesses. He's also the author of 10 Ways to Get Sued by Anyone and Everyone, which is a practical guide for business owners. And he's the host of the Accidental Entrepreneur podcast since 2019. And with a background that blends legal expertise and entrepreneurial insight, Mitch provides practical legal guidance that helps business owners avoid common pitfalls while focusing on sustainable growth. All those things, everyone listening is like, I love it because they're accidental entrepreneurs. They were in the trade, they were technicians,
Right.
Started a home service business. So it's going to be a great conversation. Can you tell us a little bit how you got into law, some of your background? What does that look like?
Sure. I mean, you're going back 40 years, right? So I guess when I was in college, I was majoring in, business and economics and finance, stuff like that.
Okay.
And I didn't want to really go the MBA route or anything like that. So I was always attracted to small businesses and planning and things like that. My dad was in the life insurance business most of his career. So I just decided to go to law school. I was sitting around with a buddy of mine and he was like, I'm going to law school. And I was like, all right, I'll go to law school too. And then 2 days later, he said, I decided I don't want to go to law school. And then I said, well, do I really want to go to law school? I was just drunk with him one night. And I was like, I don't know. I think knowing the law is a good background for, whatever you're going to do, if you're going to be in business or whatever. In some cases, it makes you dangerous, but I ended up going to law school and I got very interested in tax and finance and business planning, all the legal stuff. And when I got out, started working for insurance companies and financial companies. That was really my dad's market and my connections there.
Yeah.
And over the years, I've learned all the, ins and outs of the legal side of doing planning and work for small business owners. And that's my whole practice. It's all transactional work, document drafting, forming companies, helping small business owners acquire companies. We do have some home improvement contractors and retailers and things like that buy other small businesses. That's kind of their strategy to expand. And then I help them with their commercial leasing and I help them with their wills and trusts and estates. And it's just kind of developed like that. I try to stay out of court when I can. I don't litigate. I maybe deals with some, the probate court sometimes or a tenant eviction. If you're a business owner and you own some property and you're like, Mitch, I don't know what to do. This guy's not paying me. So, all right, so we'll file an eviction, but I'm not not your PI lawyer, going to sue for stuff like that or even commercially.
Yeah. So you're going to try to keep things clean, protect you from a tax, a legal perspective. Hopefully nothing happens.
Exactly. And then about 2001, I think I kind of migrated out of working, in-house for financial companies because I had like a small legal practice on the side and I had a lot of contacts in the financial world and, the insurance guys and the wirehouse guys and all that kind of stuff. And I, went out on my own and because I was just getting a lot of legal referrals and I, left that world, started my practice and, continued to grow the practice that I had now. I've had partners over the years and worked for other people. And just before the pandemic, I just went back solo and I've been mostly virtual at this point. I do most of my stuff, virtually. Yeah.
That's awesome. And the podcast, how did that come about?
Well, the podcast came about because I guess in 2019, I was thinking that I listened to a lot of podcasts, a lot of business podcasts, right? Yeah. I think there's a lot of good knowledge to be gained. And, I read a lot of contracts. I'm not always reading like for pleasure. I do some of that. I have a book on my desk, but yeah. But so I think I heard a video once or another podcast that said, hey, you can start a podcast for $75. And I'm like, well, don't you need like a studio and, a sound manager or whatever. Yeah. So I had partners then and we bought some cheap equipment in those days. If you listen to the early episodes, they don't sound very good. And I started learning about how to do all this editing and it was all audio at the time.
Yeah.
Right. But it was the decision to say, all right, what kind of content do I want to produce to drive my brand, to drive the firm and things like that. So it's really, I don't anticipate signing any deals with Spotify in the near future. Right. So it's more of a content marketing strategy for me. And I enjoy it. People come to me all the time. Should I start a podcast? And I was like, well, don't do it because everyone else is doing it. Do it because you have something to share and you like to be on the mic and you like to talk and you like to interview people or however you're going to do it.
Exactly.
And yeah, that's kind of why I started, and it's kind of taken on a life of its own. We're 6 years in, 400 episodes. You've been on the show,
Yeah.
and the episode is not out yet, I don't think, but yeah, and I don't even look. Somebody asked me like, how do I find guests? I don't know about you, but
Yeah.
I get recommended 2-3 guests a day now.
Yep.
I mean, I
Yep.
don't even look for them.
Just
So
natural. Yeah.
yeah,
Organic.
it's just because
Yeah.
once you have enough episodes, the bookers find you and the matching websites find you. So that's been, yeah. And then I do blogging and stuff as other marketing strategies now that I have somebody doing the editing and things like that. But that's kind of how it came
Yeah.
about, to
Yeah.
tell
Very cool.
people's story, to tell stories of success and failure and what they learned and how
Yeah.
to, because a lot of people come to me who are clients. You'll come to me and say, Mitch, it's Phil. Listen, I need help. I got to shut my business down. And I'll be like, Phil, didn't you start your business like 4 months ago? Like what happened? What does your business plan say?
Yeah.
And they're
Yeah.
like, I don't have a business plan, and there's a lot of that missing. And that's kind of where the whole kind of accidental concept came from. Yeah.
Yeah. Makes complete sense.
Yeah.
In your book, The 10 Ways to Get Sued by Anyone and Everyone,
Yeah.
I love the title. I think it's awesome. Very attention grabbing.
Yeah.
What are like a couple of those?
Yeah. So, and by the way, I give some credit to my co-author, Barry Cohen, who
Okay.
he's got like a 10 ways series. That's where the 10
Uh,
ways came from.
I like
When we
it.
came up with the title, and without him, I would never get, I can't write. It took me 3.5 years to write this book. So, and it's
Love it.
it's a resource guide more than it's a story, right? If you've looked at it.
Yeah.
So I've interviewed other attorneys that work in other areas, and we looked at, what if your partner's getting divorced, and what's that going to do to your business? What about risk management? And we talked to some insurance people that know the business. Employment law matters. Collection issues. Talk to a collections attorney, and how do you stay ahead of that game? But the main theme in the book is, putting things in writing, making sure that you do business on paper. And it's very applicable when we're talking about home improvement contractors, because a lot of the consumer fraud statutes in different states, especially in New Jersey, New York, where I practice, require that you do business in writing.
Mm.
And there's statutory requirements that say, hey, you have to, and everybody should check the state in which they're in and see what the laws are. But, some of the states require you register, get an home improvement license,
Yeah.
contractor number
Yeah.
with the Division of Consumer Affairs or maybe some other government entity. And there's requirements of the law as to often what the contract should say. And they have sample language that you got to include. You got to give them a certain time to review the contract. And it's got to say a start date and an end date and the price, and everything's changes have to be in writing and so forth. And if you don't follow those rules, in New Jersey, for example, you can be liable for treble damages. So
Wow.
even if you cause damage by accident and they sue you and you don't help them, or they're not willing to work with you, you might be paying 3 times what the damage was, plus their attorney's fees, plus their court costs.
Wow.
And yeah, and New York's pretty similar. So, and I'm sure there's a lot of states that are similar to that too. So you need to know your state laws, and like real estate and some other businesses, you're required to do business in writing. And you know what? Between you and me, like, professionals use contracts, right? So you give them an estimate, you make sure you have a contract, they sign it, you make sure that any changes you make, even if they're, on the job and they're like, hey, can you do this? That you follow it up with an email and say, hey, listen, we talked about this morning. We're going to do this. This is the additional cost. Please at least respond back. You're confirming that.
That's right.
So you have a
Paper trail.
record of what was
Yeah.
discussed, right? And in court, that would be admissible. And you'd say, listen, this is our course of doing business. And, they wouldn't sign the amendment the next time I went there, but I have an email that says what we did. So, yeah. And you got to make it a habit. And I know that if you start out doing small contractor work, in home improvements, things like that, you're doing it a little loosey-goosey at the beginning, but you got to build the habit of doing it in writing and all these things, because that's what happens. These projects get out of hand. And I consult with homeowners too, and when I have them doing projects, I say, listen, you got to start a binder. You got to get your contract. Let me review it. And every time you do something, follow it up with an email, print the email out, put it in the book. And when the contractor, who's very busy, right, he's got a lot of jobs going on, he says, honestly, Phil, I don't remember us talking about that I was going to run Cat 5 for you because, I had extra in my truck. And you go, well, if you look at the email from May 15th, we talked about it. I followed it up. I sent you an email, and, there's not a lot to argue about. So, because those things, they just get out of control. All kind of he said, she said, and you told me this, and then you didn't. So, yeah. So that's that gets to be difficult. So that's the main
thing.
theme of the book. Like, have a written business plan, have contracts with your customers, because you kind of have to in the home improvement business. If you have a partner, make sure you have agreements with your partners. Don't wait until you're arguing over the trucks and the tools and, pencils and paper. It just gets nuts,
Yeah.
and costs you a lot of money in legal fees.
Yeah. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. I think a lot of people usually, so our audience is like 1 to 10 million in revenue. So usually at
Yeah.
$1 million, you have some type of a contract, but things change throughout the contract.
Yeah.
Things are said, technicians are out on the job, and things
Big
don't
time.
happen. And
Right.
so, to your point, got to try to get it in writing as best you can via email or some type of communication that's
Something,
documentable. Yeah.
tell your technicians that if, I don't know how automated businesses are these days. The
Yeah.
bigger you are, the probably more automated you are. But if you're not working on an iPad or whatever, have the technician send a text back to the office and say, listen,
Yeah.
I just talked to the homeowner. This is what we agreed to. Please send them an addendum.
There you go.
Right. And
Yeah.
make it a habit to do that. And your guys have to learn some of the business responsibilities they have when they're out in the field.
Exactly.
It's not just like, okay, and they go ahead. Because I've had situations with homeowners where the guy's on site, not the owner, right? He's one of the
Exactly.
workers,
Yeah.
and he says to the guy, listen, I got some extra. This was literally like, I think Cat 5 or something to do with wiring, right? They were running stuff up to a third floor or something. And they're like, listen, while I'm pulling all this stuff up, I can pull up some extra, Cat 5. Don't worry about it. It's in the truck. We have it. And then next thing you know, they're getting a bill for it. And they're like, well, I literally told the guy, as long as it's not costing me any money, that's fine.
Wow.
And then that's not what he said. I talked to the guy. He didn't say that.
Yep.
Yeah. Things get a little out of control.
Yep.
And
That's
it's already
it.
done. Like the stuff was in the wall already.
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
So now you're arguing about, yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So as companies are scaling, like that 1 to 10 million mark, are there things legally that, okay, you need to get this in place. You need to get this thing. What does that look like? Because your exposure becomes more and your processes change. Like, are there things specifically that you would pinpoint, like, hey, you got to do this?
Yeah. Well, there's a couple of things. First, let's move over to the risk side, risk management side, right? You make sure, 'cause this happens a lot, that you communicate with your insurance company as your volume grows and your business grows. So from a liability standpoint and things like that, the insurance companies want to know, are you doing 500,000 or are you now doing 5 million?
Yeah.
And you're doing 5 million and they may want to raise your premium. So they don't want to pay on a $2 million claim when they thought you were doing $500,000 of business, right? So that's the one thing on that side. On the documenting side, if you don't already have it and you're doing a couple $1 million in sales, you need an operating agreement that talks about what are the rules and responsibilities of everybody in the business. I even recommend if you're the only owner, you still should have an operating agreement, because if you end up in a lawsuit and they're requesting documents and you don't have one, they're going to try and argue that the business is really just you and you should be personally liable. And then in order to have an operating agreement, either you got to commit fraud and make your own agreement, which is probably going to suck anyway, or you go to an attorney and no attorney's going to want to backdate an agreement. It creates something that didn't exist. So I recommend even to the solo owners that have been operating, get an operating agreement. The second thing is that there's something called a buy-sell agreement, which is common in the financial planning world when it comes to business planning, that addresses a number of things, but 4 major issues, right? And this is common when you have partners, but we'll talk about if you don't have partners in a minute. So it would address 4 basic things, right? One is if you want to retire and walk away from the business. 2 is that you're being what I call involuntarily terminated. Somebody's trying to sue you, you're getting divorced, and your spouse is trying to take half your business, whatever. Third one would be death, premature death. And the fourth one would be becoming disabled, especially if you're out doing jobs and up on roofs and ladders and stuff. So if you have a partner in the business, right, you want something in writing that says, hey, if you want to walk away, if you're getting sued, if you die, I got to deal with your family. If you become disabled and you can no longer work, what happens with the business? Do I buy you out? Do I continue to pay you? Because you may have to hire somebody to replace that person, right? And what's the value of the business and how do we keep that up? What's the formula? And because that really avoids a lot of issues, especially with sudden death. And then you deal with the family and the family thinks it's worth $10 million. And you're like, no, it's not. It's worth $2 million, whatever.
Yeah.
And you get an argument. So those are buy-sell agreements. I have a lot of clients who are solopreneurs. They may have employees, but they're the only owners.
Yeah.
And their question is always, okay, well, how do I do that for me? How do I give my family some peace of mind? So a couple ways to do that. One is you could do it with a key employee, right? You could say to them, listen, if I die, or I can't work anymore. I want to retire. Do you want to take over the business? And you can do some sort of a deal. Maybe you give them some benefit for doing that, like a discount to buy the business. And you promise them, listen, if we sell the company in the future, I'll give you a piece. There's all kinds of ways to do that. Or maybe you fund the agreement with life insurance and you let the company pay for the life insurance, so they're not really paying for it, but it gives your spouse peace of mind on the transition to deal with all this stuff. Or if you don't have that, maybe you have a colleague in the industry. You know, you're both home improvement contractors. You see each other a lot. Yep. Sometimes you can't handle the job. You send it to him or vice versa. You work together. You can do a cross agreement where you agree for each other to be the backup program. And we do a lot of that stuff too. So that's probably as you're growing. I'm not saying that's the thing you do from the get-go, but if you're doing $1 million or more in revenue, 5 million, 10 million in revenue, definitely something that's a little overdue at that point that you should be addressing. Yeah.
I think the buy-sell agreement that happens so much. Divorce, I'm out of here, death. Those are the big ones. And then it leaves everyone floundering, and it kind of goes back. You got to have it down on paper. Everyone knows what's happening.
Or they're all arguing about it, right? And then you forget it when the lawyers get involved and they want to make money and they're, screaming at each other about what it's worth and what it's not worth, and you don't even know. And this guy put so much in and he don't. It just gets crazy.
Yeah. So a lot of people, they get to 4 or 5 million. I've gone through several transactions with our clients as well, but I want to talk a little bit about if someone's considering selling or transferring ownership, what should business owners do way in advance to make sure their company's more valuable, transferable? Yeah. How can they set themselves up to get the most money for it, but then also protect themselves like from an asset perspective?
Yeah. So, and this is always the problem with business owners, right? Sometimes you operate your business really from a cash flow standpoint, a lifestyle standpoint, like it supports your lifestyle, but on paper, it doesn't look too good. So you have to balance what your books look like from a net revenue standpoint, because I do a lot of business transaction work, right? Okay. And often I'm coming into a situation where we're going through due diligence, and I'm not an accountant in any stretch of the imagination, but I go through a lot of this stuff with clients where you're looking at a business to buy the business. Let's say we're on the purchaser side, right? Mm-hmm. And you have a broker and the owner that's trying to convince you why there's really profit in this business because they have all these ad backs, right? Yeah. We're taking, I'm paying for the car payments, right? Yeah. The whole family, and that maybe that's true, but it's a hard pill to swallow. Of course. Right? It also becomes a problem for the buyer if he wants to finance this thing, because no lender, SBA or otherwise, is going to go from anything except what's on paper. They're not going to go with the cash that you're pulling out of the washing machines every month, or the cash that you collect from jobs that you do that you don't report, because that you can't count that stuff. Maybe the guy buying it understands that side of the business, and he says, listen, it's a cash business. I don't, it's a good way to manage my cash. I know I don't have to pay tax on everything. Exactly. And because, as long as I'm reporting whatever, and that's his choice. But in terms of buying the business on paper, you can't, finance things that don't show up. So, and that does not happen in 6 months before you sell the business. That's got to be something you've been doing for 5 to 10 years.
That's right.
And you will pay some tax because of it, but.
Yeah, but you have clean books, and
books, right?
Yeah, then when you go to sell it, you have the EBITDA is easy to calculate, the profits there easy. Everyone, it's easy to look at your stuff and make sense.
Right, right. So now from the legal side, more right, you want to make sure that what I call your corporate governance is in line, right? Big term, applying to large corporations, public companies, whatever. But when you're a small business owner, you want to make sure you do have like an operating agreement or articles of incorporation, bylaws that are up to date, that you've kept minutes and resolutions of changes you've made with the business along the way, that all of your state and in some cases federal filings are up to date and on target, depending on the kind of purchase that's being made, because they may be buying the assets, they may be buying the stock. It varies. Buy more assets more often than stock, right? Yep. But every state has filing requirements for LLCs and corporations and things like that. Now we are very fortunate to have an additional filing requirement that the Financial Crimes Division now requires that people file a beneficial ownership information report. If people search BOIR, they will find a lot of sites. Make sure you get to the actual government site, not these marketing bullshit sites that are trying to charge you money. That's free. There's no filing fee for this. But you're required to do it now within 30 days of setting up the business. And
Oh,
for
wow.
older businesses, you had all of 2024 and the last 2 months, the first 2 months of 2025 to file this thing. And
Oh, okay.
it's like a $500 a day penalty if you don't do it. So if anybody's out there listening and they haven't filed their ownership information report, they should do it immediately, because I don't know what kind of enforcement they're going to do with regard
Yeah.
to people who have no idea what these things are. Applies to corporations and LLCs, not partnerships or sole proprietors.
You said corporations and LLC, so like an S corp,
S corps, C corps.
LLC. Yeah.
Yep. S
Ownership
corp, C
information.
corps, LLCs. You got to file these things. They're just, you basically provide information like a copy of your driver's license, who you are, some information about the business, and then you're done.
Yeah.
One time filing, unless you move or you change ownership or something. But that's another thing. So if you're buying the business and they've never filed the report, you might be like, and then make sure you do the filing immediately. But you want
Yes.
an indemnification if later on, 6 months from now, you're buying the business, it comes back and you get a fine
Exactly.
that this guy never filed, even though you did. He's got to pay it. So
Yeah.
yeah, so that's that. You want to make sure those are all kind of up to date, and that's some of the due diligence that as a buyer you would do, but
Yeah.
some of it you can't correct.
Yeah.
You know,
Makes sense. Of course, you can't correct.
yeah, or
All
there's
right. So
penalties for correcting.
there's penalties. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
So let's say someone has one location and they're like, hey, I want to go to a second location.
Yeah.
What are the legal considerations for something like that? Do they need what's the best way to structure one location to two locations starting expanding?
Yeah. So let's assume right now it's within this one state. Okay,
Yeah, it's
it's
easy
in
like
one
that.
state. Let me keep it easy. I would encourage them to, if they could, do business at each location in a separate entity.
Okay.
Okay. Now there are entities out there. Delaware is one of them. I think Alaska has this, maybe Oklahoma. There's something called a Delaware Series LLC. Not Delaware. There's something called a Series LLC.
Mm-hmm.
Delaware in specific. I use it for like real estate owners and stuff. It allows you to set up one master LLC and then have little subseries for each business,
Mm-hmm.
as long as you keep separate books and records for the business. You don't have to have separate tax ID numbers. So
Wow.
right. And you don't have to file for each entity that you open. So I have guys that have franchise locations. They're opening up franchise. So we do, restaurant 001, restaurant
Mm-hmm.
002, and the
Mm-hmm.
master's called whatever holdings.
Okay.
Yeah. And then they don't have to file every time. So if we sign a new lease, it's not like I got to run to set this thing up. It's already set up. I just have a 3-page agreement we signed for our internal records.
Okay.
So that's a good way to do
That's
it.
good, yeah.
If you already got 4 or 5 locations and you don't have this Delaware thing set up and it's too difficult to transfer everything, then yeah, I would set up separate LLCs for each location. But you want to make sure that you don't commingle assets. Like you have one LLC paying for other things, because then they can just argue that they're all on the table if there's a lawsuit involved.
Yeah.
But you want to notify your insurance carrier too when you're doing that too. Make sure
Yeah.
you're covering the multiple entities and stuff. But that's how I would do that sort of expansion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's really hard because like one location is their main location and they're going to be taking money and team members, and paying for the second location to get up and running. And then how do you blend that? So
Yeah,
there's
I mean,
a lot of
some of that may involve discussion with payroll companies.
exactly.
I will tell you this: if you're offering benefits to your employees, you
Mm.
have to pool them anyway. You can't exclude. You can't put
Yeah.
you and me in that one LLC as the owners, and we get all the benefits, and then you exclude. They got rid of those rules. They're called affiliated service rules and service group rules that came about years ago and said you can't do this anymore. You got to treat everybody the same. So you don't get around that stuff. But yeah, some of it's bookkeeping stuff, some of it's payroll stuff, some of it's accounting. You talk to your accountant. People ask me, should I be a C corp, an S corp? Definitely an accounting question.
Yeah.
An LLC can become a C corp. It doesn't really convert, but you make an S election to be treated like an S corp. You can do that nowadays. And the states are catching up with that, with those elections as well. So there's opportunity, not in a bad way. I mean, when you file them, now they're asking the question. They never used to ask the question.
Yeah.
Yeah, they just be IRS thing. So so that's some of this stuff. That's why it comes down to building a good team. I'm the lawyer and I'm part of the team, but you don't call me every month. You may be talking to your CPA and your bookkeeper every month.
That's right.
But quarterly, you want to definitely talk to your insurance people and your payroll people and stay on top of that kind of stuff and say, hey, listen, we're looking to buy 3 locations. What does the payroll look like if we got people in different LLCs? And then they might say, not a problem. We can, some of them can handle that.
Right.
So you want to figure that stuff out. But part of that's business management. You just got to do it. And then me, I don't know. You talk to me once a year unless you got problems.
Yeah. So you only work for people that are located in New York and New Jersey type businesses, or can you help anyone?
So I do work with companies outside of New York, New Jersey, more as a business advisor.
Okay.
With one exception, I do some of the tax planning. I do. People want
Yeah.
to put more money away or whatever.
Mm.
I'll do those federally as long as they have
Okay.
local counsel if it's necessary. So I'm an attorney for a non-qualified type of program that people want to put more money away
Makes
in,
sense.
and we have clients in Alabama and South Carolina and Texas and Illinois and California, and as long as they have local counsel, I'll do the federal stuff in terms of
Yeah.
planning these things. I do all the documentation for these. And there's some financial companies that I do work for their clients that
Yeah.
they bring in. So, but usually those programs, they're looking to put away, $250,000 or more a year
Right.
collectively.
Right.
Doesn't work if you're putting away 10. Just do a
Yeah.
401k. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Okay, that makes sense. Another question I have for growth and scaling challenges that a lot of people face is
Yeah.
the employment challenges, and how can people protect themselves or structure like legal protections when you're getting a bunch of people that are coming on board.
Yeah.
Any thoughts on that or protection or?
We're talking about from an employment law standpoint.
Yes.
Yeah. So if you are, first of all, you want to basically start clean, right, with the new employees. So you wouldn't be obligated to hire them. If you're going to hire them, you hire them yourself. But in the purchase agreement, you want to make sure that that all PTO has been paid, paid time
Mm.
off, and any of the requirements under law under the old company are up to date, and that and then you have representation from the company and maybe even the employees, depending how big it is, that they're all square and owed and paid, that they don't come back to you and say, hey, they owe me 6 months of pay, whatever. That's why usually an asset purchase is a safer way to go
Yeah,
than
I see.
than a stock purchase, a business purchase. Sometimes you can't because I don't know, maybe the business has contracts that it's too hard to transfer them all over or whatever. But you may be inheriting problems with the past employees, so you want indemnifications and representations from the owners. The things are up to date. So if you do run into like Department of Labor issues, you
Yes.
get a Department of Labor audit a month after. I had somebody had this happen to. I was involved in the transaction. They bought the business for whatever reason. There were contracts or whatever. 2 months later, they get an audit based on something happened 6-8 months ago,
Oh God.
and now they're dealing with the
Yes.
other people, and they didn't have the proper indemnifications, and
Ugh.
it was messy, and a lot of people like ran for the hills, so to speak. So
Yeah. So do people like call you up, set up meetings with you, and just like give you all their problems, and you have to try to figure it all out, or is it hopefully more proactive, or how does it usually engagement look?
okay, so I would say, and that's why I have a monthly retainer program, right?
Yeah.
So if
Okay.
somebody comes on a monthly retainer, I get to know their business.
There you go.
So then when they call me, I'm familiar, Phil, with your company, and I
Okay.
know what's going on. So let's assume that's not the case. We just met. You call me because you have some issue,
Yes.
right? So usually that's the hottest coal in the fire, right? So we got to deal with that issue. But as I'm going through it, I start discovering the things that are missing, like
Yeah.
documentation and filings. And then if you bring me on board, even if it's just per project, not on a monthly retainer,
Yeah.
I'm going to want to take a look at your state filings, make sure those are up to date, your agreements, make sure you've done all your kind of resolutions and minutes and you've kept those in a good, readable form. I might talk to your CPA about what your books look like and things
Yeah.
like that. And then we can strategize going forward about what makes sense to position you to, like you said, succeed, transition the business. You got 2 kids in the business. How do they take it over? I do that for a lot of families. How do we make sure the parents still get income and the kids start taking over the business and not keep it in the parents' name? And, what does that look like? And yeah, so it does take a while. I mean, it's 15, 20 hours of work, but
Of course.
you should have been doing it from the beginning. So
That's right. I think people probably reach out to you because they have a bunch of problems, and then they realize, man, I need to just like work with this guy so that I can call him and he knows my stuff. So it's
Yeah.
not just trying to unravel
Right.
a bunch of things for 20 hours every single time, whatever.
Yeah, because that's how I started all the estate planning, right? Because then you talk to the guy, when you do an operating agreement, you're talking to the partners, and you go, well, what does your will say happen to you? Like, what supersedes this? And they go, we don't have any wills. So then you got to do that part because it's all interrelated. That's one of their biggest assets is the business.
That's right.
And if you died and you had probate issues and all kinds of stuff, so you got to kind of figure that part of it out too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it makes total sense.
You know.
So Mitch, thank you so much. You've given I love when people come on and they give real examples of real situations, not just fluff things, especially if they've written a book and it's just fluff. So
Yeah.
you gave a lot of good stuff, real examples, and I appreciate that. Where should people go to get in contact with you or learn more about you and the business?
Well, beinhakerlaw.com is the website. I also have a personal MitchBeinhaker.com where you can find the book
Oh, okay.
There's some ebooks on there. If I get an ebook, if I have parents that panic when their kids go to college and they realize that they can't talk on their behalf because they're 18,
Yeah, okay.
I
That's a
wrote a
good
book
one.
on that, like a survival guide. I think there's a lemon law guide. There's a bunch of stuff in there, some brochures, and you can also see like when we get this up, I'll put a link to it. They'll be on that website.
Okay.
Also, I'm on LinkedIn, and my VA puts us on the show. She edits the podcast, so she puts that stuff on Reels and YouTube. We have a
Okay.
YouTube channel, LinkedIn. I guess I'm on Facebook too. I don't look at Facebook too often, but yeah. So
I love
probably,
it.
and if you want to connect with me, LinkedIn's a good place to do it as well.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Awesome. All right. Well, it's been great, man. Look forward
appreciate
to
it.
continue the conversation, and yeah, maybe we'll have you on again. It's a good convo.
Always available.
All right. Thanks, Mitch.
Thanks,
See ya.
Phil.